those of you who are joining us today for our live stream about the finish line in the home buying process. Welcome to Chloe Godin and Brandon Moore. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Rosanna. Thanks for having me.
Hi there.
Hi. Always a pleasure to talk with you both. You're such experienced agents who know what it is and how to get your clients to the finish line. And so today we're going to be talking about three important elements of the home buying process, which happen at the finish line, which are the walkthrough, the closing, and then moving and beyond. And so we're going to jump right in. This is about educating potential buyers and what they can expect. So starting with you, Brandon, tell us, what is it that happens actually at the walkthrough?
So at the walkthrough, you are looking at the physical property to ensure it's in the same condition from when you sign the contract. If there was anything negotiated in the contract that the seller would be fixing, you're inspecting that work to ensure that it was done properly. So if it has kind of a rule of thumb, if it has an on switch, it has to turn on. You're turning on the faucets, making sure there's no leaks, the stove works and all the burners and everything in between. So you're ensuring the property is in the same, if not better condition from when you saw it.
Okay. And what are some common walkthrough issues and what should be done about them?
I mean, they can range from, very minor things like one of the four burners is not working and it's just usually just a quick tweak, shift in anything to something where there can be a leak, there could be issues from a unit above. So it kind of depends on what it is on a case-by-case basis. But it's important to walk with your agent, discover what these things are, and then some of them can be fixed. Minor things can be fixed with the super. If there's a super at the building, they can run up, small shifts in anything. So they can help you there. Larger items is something you have to take to your attorney and let them know, and they can negotiate with the seller side from there.
Yeah, that's a great question because walkthroughs are kind of, you think you're at the end. It's usually the day before closing or the day of, depending on people's availabilities. And people are so excited. They're going to get their apartment, their townhouse, their home, and it's a really essential part. So there are things that we have to be really careful about. And I'll give examples of what's happened at walkthroughs. For example, we negotiate that certain items remain. Let's say you have an AC in the window or a really nice chandelier. This is something that you have to negotiate up front. And sometimes owners forget or we don't want the furniture that was in there. I've had owners who have not taken the furniture out. And so, that's something that people don't really want, that furniture. So you have to resolve that. And then there are bigger things like dishwasher is not functioning in the contract. When you sign, it says appliances are working as is. So before you sign the contract, it's really important. When I go with my clients, we always check. Does the stove turn on? Does the dishwasher work? Is the fridge working? And so, it's very important because if the day of the closing comes and the dishwasher is not functioning and they say, well, it wasn't functioning before. Well, no, it was because we checked it. So then that's a discussion and attorneys take care of negotiating. Are we going to put money in escrow or is the seller going to take care of it before closing? I've had both scenarios.
Okay. And that's kind of, down to the wire. What happens if, how can an unsatisfactory walkthrough impact the closing date?
Yeah. So as you say, it's down to the wire, which is why I prefer doing closings, usually the walkthroughs the day before closing so that we have that 24-hour time period to negotiate something. It has sometimes delayed closings. If people are being very stubborn, we're talking about hundreds of thousands or $1 million deals. And then at the last day, it's like maybe hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands. So it's really not that much based on the purchase price, but often people get very like, this is it, we're not doing anything more. So sometimes you need time and that's why you really need a skilled attorney, somebody who's very good at negotiating, who was careful about what was in the rider and can negotiate that for your client. And it can push back the closing date. Usually not. I think because there's that deadline, it really gives a sense of urgency. Sellers usually want to sell, buyers usually want to buy. At that point, everyone wants to move forward.
Yeah.
And so because of that sense of urgency, it kind of forces people to come together. But it can happen, which is why, we talk about scheduling moving, which we'll go through later, but you can't really schedule for the day after a closing because you never know what can happen.
Yeah.
I think you made a good point about just the timing of a walkthrough. At that point, it's your last time in the apartment before you close. So you really want to be as close to your closing date as possible. I mean, I've had situations where the buyer was leaving town and wanted to have eyes on it a week ahead of time, and then the unit above had a flood that affected their unit. So essentially, when they closed, even though that it was a building issue that they were walking into that they would have to resolve, it was an apartment in disrepair because of the flooding that happened on the unit above. So that's something that would have delayed the closing, and more, the seller would have had to get their ducks in order in terms of the repairs in that apartment. So it's really important to be as close to that closing timeline, but of course having that cushion to allow, if there's anything wrong, to everyone can come together and make it happen for the closing day.
Okay. And so let's say, thankfully, the walkthrough goes well and it's time for the closing. How exciting. What should a buyer expect to happen at the closing table?
Brandon, do you want to answer that?
Sure. So the closing table is essentially when everyone's coming together. You have the managing agent, if it's in a condo or a co-op. You have the seller's attorney, the buyer's attorney, the bank if they're involved as well. Everyone's coming together, and a buyer will be prepared to sign as more documents that in that hour to 2 hour period than they've ever signed in their life. So they're coming together, and it's the actual, the paperwork process of transitioning the property from one owner to another. So it's more of a logistical process. And then if anything came up with the walkthrough, or if there's a credit being given, or that's all discussed that day or prior to the closing table. But everything's going into effect at that moment.
Okay. And so, and what kind of issues could arise and delay the closing at the closing table?
Yeah. Well, I often tell my clients, just FYI, closing is really anticlimactic because it's very administrative, as Brandon said. You're just signing papers. And pre-COVID, from time to time, I would go to closings. Obviously, COVID has changed a lot of things. And even pre-COVID, it was funny when I was doing closings with buyers from out of town or international buyers, they would always be surprised at how many people were in the room. I remember my last closing on March 13th before COVID, we were like all these people and what's going on? Is there going to be any closings anymore? Now it's very different. There may be 2 or 3 people still today. Agents don't go anymore unless, their clients really want them there, but we don't have a role to play at that point. And also, really, our job is connecting with the attorney and making sure that things are lined up for the closing. But the attorney's kind of the boss of the show at that point. So when there are issues, for example, if you're closing at the end of the month, at the closing table, you're going to have to pay the common charges for your building, the taxes. If the seller has our prepaid taxes for the quarter, you have to reimburse the seller. So, the date you close affects that number, obviously, like on the 30th. So if the closing is postponed and you're supposed to close on the last day of the month, like the last business day of the month, and then it's the next time, which is the beginning of the next month, then everything has to be recalculated. They have to reissue documents, especially the banks. So that's one thing. For example, I think Paul was mentioning that there could be liens like title. There's always title insurance to make sure that you're protected when you purchase a property, that you're protected. And if a lien comes up, they rerun titles or make sure everything's okay. If a lien comes up just like right before closing, title's not going to give you insurance, and we absolutely need title to clear and close. So that may be an issue. And then I think we were talking about drafting the documents on the spot. Sometimes, there are mistakes in the numbers. So they, both on the bank side and the attorneys, I think people are surprised at how many mistakes there are, but you have to think about the huge flow of business that goes on and how these numbers constantly change. Yeah. So be careful about what you're signing and verifying those numbers. And then, they just usually, honestly, 90% of the time, I would say issues are resolved at the closing table. Yeah. But like Brandon was saying before, let's say the broken dishwasher, if the seller didn't want to give a credit and they sent somebody to repair it, we need to see that proof of repair, like a video or a receipt from the company. Few months ago, we sold a multifamily, and the water counter, like making sure how much water was used, that takes a while because the city has to be involved. I think we closed in July, and actually this week or yesterday, they were coming to check that. So there are things that also can happen in the future, and that the attorney makes sure that it's done at the closing, that it protects the buyers and the sellers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we're using more wires these days, kind of like after COVID, and so you can't go late into the evening because banks need, if there's a payoff bank for the seller, they need to be that wire needs to take place before a certain time, and if it goes past 4:30, 4:45, they're not going to receive their funds to then be able to release the deed or the stock. So it can come down to the wire in terms of timing towards the end of the day. So earlier in the day, closings are or I think 2:00 is the latest that they'll go, just so they have enough time to do that logistical process.
That's so interesting. There really are so many different things to keep in mind for making sure that everything goes smoothly. Okay, so now, it's closing day. What should you not expect to happen on the day you're closing, Brandon?
So many buyers are planning their move, or wanting, at least mentally, just to be in their new apartment immediately. And it, as Chloe was saying, it is anticlimactic. People are expecting champagne flowing, balloons, confetti, like when you're closing. And it's, you're given the keys, and then no one likes moving. And then you have your life in one spot and you want to move it to another spot. So because there's managing agents involved, elevator bookings and everything, you can't transition into that new space immediately. Most buildings don't allow moves on the weekends. They need to be scheduled. You need insurance for your movers, everything under the sun, and they really won't engage. Building managements won't engage with you until you're actually the owner. Wow. That pre-planning that everyone is on the cusp and they overly excited to do is really difficult to confirm everything. So there's a lot of things in limbo. Even on the move after it closes, then you can engage. But beforehand, it's kind of a little bit of organized chaos.
That's so interesting. I never realized that you can't even book the elevator until you're the owner. It's like, how do you even plan around that,
Yeah, most of managing agents, go ahead, Chloe.
The timing of it is always a discussion. So when I speak to sellers, I usually say try to move a week before closing. So you have a window of time between your move and your closing to take care of whatever issues need to be taken care of in the apartment. And if, sometimes when you move, movers like damage stuff. And so you need to make sure it's repaired before you close, because otherwise you're going to have an issue as a seller. And for buyers, I'd say your move is not going to happen until a week or two after you close, depending on the season. Like if it's summer and everyone's moving in and out, there's going to be a waiting list for the elevators. They don't want to block elevators for people who live in the building, right? Yeah. And sometimes buildings have service elevators, sometimes they don't. So, timing is always an important thing. And I know people have this issue of like, I don't want to pay either two mortgages or rent and mortgage at the same time. But the truth is you're going to have to pay something, because unless you move out and put all your stuff in storage for a while, it's extremely hard to know exactly the date of your closing, unless you're planning it like a month in advance. And most people, as soon as they get the clear to close from the bank, that's it. They want to schedule the closing with the attorney. And usually that's a couple weeks out. So you don't have that much time in advance to really plan, unless you're willing to close later. So that's really something that is a discussion, and people have trouble understanding that for some reason. Do you have that too, Brandon?
Yes. I mean, I had a client who was board approved, and she was wanting board approved on a Wednesday and wanted to close that Saturday, and was not understanding how everyone could not come together for that closing to take place that weekend, because and she ended up having to put her items in storage and waiting, and the closing was also delayed because with COVID, and kind of this boom that we've experienced in Manhattan and Brooklyn being back, managing agents are backed up in terms of scheduling. So even the actual closing date was pushed out, just because buyer and seller are ready to go, but the managing agent plays a pivotal role there. So they have to be involved as well. So.
Well, that's a lot to keep in mind. Chloe, were you going to add something?
Yeah, no, there's just so many people involved in the closing, and that we really can't control it. There's the two attorneys, there's the management agent, there's the banks. And so I'm always surprised at how it's kind of difficult to get them all to agree on a time. And they're like always 20 emails back and forth, and the title has to be involved, and and you just have to be patient. That's why I say, just keep your eye on the ball. You're getting a new home, or you're selling your home and you're moving on. We're really happy with this. Kind of ignore all the administrative, annoying last minute discussions between all these different actors. It's just the way it is. Is it the most efficient in New York City? No, I'm sure there are other places that are more efficient, but it is what it is. And so we got to be on board and just make it as enjoyable as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's I think an important role as a real estate broker is we help kind of organize and keep everyone in the loop with this chaos. Because from board approval to the actual closing, there's so many people involved. And so it's helping kind of organize and communicate that for the buyer, because they may not hear anything directly, but all those people Chloe just listed are talking and trying to organize on finalize a date 2 to 3 weeks out. So it sometimes can feel like nothing's happening, but so much is happening behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It really makes such a huge difference to have an experienced agent broker working with you, because, for example, what you just said, Chloe, about this is very exciting, just ignore all the little, annoyances. I think just hearing that would put me so much more at ease. And obviously it takes an experienced agent to know that this is the way it goes, obviously, and that it's, managing the client's expectations, because when someone's antsy to get into their new home or out, it really does require managing expectations to know what's going to happen. Okay. I'm going to ask you one more question, and I'd love both of your input on this. Okay, so you can't move the day that you close, but what kind of timeline should buyers follow when planning ahead for their move? How soon before the move should people start planning, and what kinds of things should they keep in mind?
That's a good question. I mean, it really depends on each case, but obviously, packing can take a lot of time. And I think figuring out, am I going to be doing all the packing myself? Am I going to hire a moving company to do it? And how much does moving actually cost? Now, it depends. If you're willing to do everything yourself and put it in the U-Haul and get some friends around, that's going to be one timeline. If you're going to hire a moving company, you want to get a couple of quotes. Obviously, at Triplemint, we have a few movers we recommend. different movers have different prices and different levels of services. Like last time I moved, I was in the middle of the Jewish holidays plus a very busy work period. I just paid them to pack everything. And honestly, it's the best money I've ever spent. They did it in 3 hours. They put it really organized in really nice boxes. And like, it was boop, boop. It was so quick. And then they put all my furniture where I wanted it. And bam, I was like, you know, it was livable. So I think, you know, it's important to know where you're coming from, where you're going, what your budget is, but that's definitely a budget to think about.
Yeah.
And, you know, stuff like Con Ed and internet, et cetera, that also you can't take care of until you have become the owner of the new place. And Con Ed is pretty quick. You can do it online. So we give you the website and show you how to do it. Once you're the official owner, like at closing, management company receives the documents. They need to register it in the building. It might take a couple of days also, but it's very quick to do. Internet, as we all know, it depends on the provider, it depends on your building. So you know, it can take a while. And nowadays it's so essential that I even say, try to make an appointment a little bit in advance or the day before, just so that it might come quicker. What else? Am I forgetting anything, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, you know, case by case in the apartment. A lot of clients want to like paint, you know, refresh the appliances, do things like this. And that takes time. And as we were mentioning before, you can't really schedule that with the building until you're the owner. As much as we, you know, say there's a decorating agreement for a contractor to come in and paint, you want that approved the moment you submit that, but a managing agent has a backlog that they need to review. So it doesn't happen in 48 hours that they're approved to paint the apartment for your, you know, your painter to come in and do everything. So that takes a little bit of time. I have a client right now who closed a couple of weeks ago, and they want to replace all the flooring. Highly recommend if you're going to do that before you move, because it's such a pain in the butt to move everything.
Sure.
When you're replacing the flooring. But they ultimately decided they're just going to move without, because there's such a backlog of appliances, flooring, everything. That whole supply chain that you're hearing about on the news has affected the home renovation industry so much.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I to bounce on that too. I have a client who closed. I don't even know, a couple of months ago in the summer, I'd say. And she wanted to renovate the bathrooms and the kitchen, and we had spoken about this. And I said, you know, you really should identify your architect and your contractor as soon as possible and get plans so that you can submit that alteration agreement ASAP. And she was like, oh, it's fine. I don't want to move out my rental until August or September anyway. And I said, yeah, but still, you need time. She didn't realize really how long it took. And she's in a very nice building. And it turns out that building is even more complicated than other buildings. And she's had back and forth for 2 to 3 months with on that renovation. And first of all, to agree on what pricing with a contractor, then to submit the plans, then to get the property management to respond. Like it's been really complicated for her. And she's starting the renovations, I think, last month. So everything took much longer. And I try to, you know, make her understand that point when we're in the process. But often there's so many things that you have to think about in the buying process that doesn't really fit in. You're like, oh, it's fine. But I do recommend, if you're going to renovate, budget another 3 to 6 months post closing to get the work done, depending on what you want to do, especially now with the back.
I think people are fooled by all these television shows, or even if they think it's a minor project, everything happens in 30 minutes or an hour. And it's like, oh, that was so quick. And especially they're not in New York City. So it can change, you know, obviously doing a small project in the Midwest versus New York. There's a lot more hoops to jump through here. So it's just allowing time for that. So I think buyers are just like mentally thinking, oh, it's so simple. And then it's not. So it's important to have those conversations to just kind of manage their expectations.
Yeah, HGTV is great. We all love those shows, but that's not really reality, or at least not in New York City. And
Yeah,
the cut
correct.
the months, I'm always like, did you see that the trees were green at the beginning of the episode and it was snowing at the end? Like, how long do you think that took them?
Yeah.
You
Even
know,
on a $1 million listing, I am like, they don't show you the hours of a board package in like the 1,000 pages that you're turning into the managing agent and all that stuff.
right. It's so true. I have personally learned so much in preparing for today's segment from you and Paul, who was going to join us but couldn't be with us. So thank you both so much. Obviously, there's so much to learn from experienced agents who've been through this before. And so for anyone who is looking to buy or to sell or to rent, please reach out to Chloe or Brandon, or reach out to us at hello@Triplemint. You're going to be in excellent hands. And also they make it a lot of fun. So thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Brandon, so much for joining us and walking us through what to expect during the finish line.
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Great.
Bye.
Brandon, have a great day, guys.
You too.